Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, August 7th, 2013, hump day, middle of the weekday. Starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another weekend. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, managing the dials, twiddling the little buttons, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, the big news, at least as far as the corporate media is concerned, continues to be the terror threat, the global terror threat. Pay no attention to IRS scandals and NSA scandals and the rest of it. We have terrorists to wave at you. And frankly, the credibility of this latest terror threat has not been very good. Media outlets around the world, certainly the independent media, are saying this is just appears to be a completely ginned up, out of thin air story to try and take some of the heat off the NSA for spying on law-abiding American citizens, and I'm certainly of that opinion myself. But they keep raising on a busted flush. And they keep coming out with ever more fantastical stories to convince you, oh, yes, there's a terror threat. You should be afraid of them. You should run to the government and cling to their coattails to save you from those evil, horrible terrorists out there. Now, remember, according to the U.S. government's own count, in the entire year of 2012, not a single American inside the United States of America was killed by a terrorist. Total of 12, all in other countries, were killed by terrorists or somebody pretending to be a terrorist. So the new story coming out today is that all of this closures of embassies and all this brouhaha and sending in drone strikes to Yemen and all these other countries is because the NSA intercepted a conference phone call of the top 20 Al-Qaeda leaders sitting around on an open phone system and saying, yeah, let's go do something terrible. So the official story really comes down to, in a world where it has been known phone calls were being tapped all the way back to the 1980s echelon system, 20 Al-Qaeda officials had a conference call in which they chattered about massive attacks on the United States, knowing the U.S. was likely listening in. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. There is only one way that somebody would do a conference call like this: to trick the United States into running around in circles crying wolf and making themselves look more foolish than they already are, not that they need any help. There's one other possibility. Remember how Israel went into Libya, smuggled in a radio transmitter, started sending all these messages, oh, we're coming to get you, that tricked Ronald Reagan into bombing Libya. And if you go back and you look at one of the Tom Clancy books, The Sum of All Fears, the book, not the movie, because the movie left this part of it completely out. In The Sum of All Fears, the plotters there are attempting to start a war by tricking the United States into attacking somebody. In the movie, it was U.S. and Russia. But in the book, it was U.S. attacking all the Arab countries, which would have destroyed any remaining support and sympathy for the U.S. in the Middle East. And we know there are countries who would, well, there's one country who would like to do that, and one country with a past history of staging frauds like this. So if the U.S. just didn't make this up out of thin air to save themselves, the next most logical possibility is that Israel ginned this up, got 20 guys with the proper accent and language, got them on the phones and said, talk about blowing up America, and that'll trick the Americans into attacking Israel's enemies. But no way would real leaders of a real terrorist organization, knowing that the NSA monitors all communications, have a conference call in the clear. It's not going to happen. And following up on that one, the latest report from U.S. government officials, who remained anonymous, I might add, is that Al-Qaeda's come up with a chemical that they can dip their clothing in and turn the clothing into bombs. Now, if you know anything at all about explosives, you will understand that explosives that are embedded in fabric in long, thin sheets or long, thin strings are not very explosive at all. You're not going to build a concussion wave that way. It's basically a glorified sparkler. It's magician's flash paper. I made a cartoon about that, which I put on my site. But it's another way of trying to reassure us that even with all the crotch grabbing and body scanning and all the other stuff that they're doing, oh, those terrorists are still out there. You should be afraid of them, and we've got to come up with a brand new series of very expensive scanners and make you pay for them to keep you safe. I don't think so. I'm not buying this one either. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. This is a call from The Sun in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Aloha,
how's it going, Mike?
You're on the air. What's on your mind?
How's it going? I've been listening to your show for a real long time. I just want to have a couple of questions. Who's this guy, Jeffrey Bezos, who bought the Washington Post? Does he have any Jewish background?
I have no idea. I know that he made a lot of money with online businesses and stuff, and he could hardly do any worse with the Washington Post than its previous owners.
Okay. Well, his wife worked for an investment firm, a Jewish investment firm. Do you know that?
Okay, my wife is a composer. What's that got to do with the price of tea in China? I mean,
yeah.
The Washington Post, the Washington Post has been riding on its reputation ever since the days of Watergate that brought down the Nixon administration. But in more recent years, they have basically towed the line on the official U.S. government and corporate view of pretty much anything, and I think the reason that they were sold for basically fire sale prices is that they had basically destroyed their own credibility. And so at this point, I don't care who bought the Washington Post. Nobody's paying attention to it anyway, unless the Washington Post starts hiring back some real reporters who are going to go out there in the spirit of Woodward and Bernstein and say, look, our government is engaged in criminal activity, unconstitutional activity. We have got to inform the people about it so it's not allowed to go any further. If the Washington Post does that, I will applaud them. But as of right now, based on their reputation over the last several years, I don't care who's bought it. It's ineffective. They've destroyed their own credibility, and I don't think anybody's really paying attention to them. Right now, the polls are showing the independent media here online has a far larger audience. I have a larger readership at my website than the Washington Post does in Washington, D.C. So it's almost kind of a non-story there. But thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, your audio dropped. Good morning there. Aloha.
Aloha. Were you watching on BAMuser or RBN?
I'm on Bambuser there.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to say the latest one I saw now. Now they're trying to say that this NSA threat, or this terrorism threat, and this NSA scoop that they have, is because of all those prisoners that were jumped out of the jail over in Libya, and now Iraq, and now Pakistan. That's why all these irate people that are mad at the United States are all going to come back at us now.
Well, it's a funny thing. When you go out and you grab completely innocent people, throw them in a prison, torture them to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist, they may not have been terrorists when you arrested them, but they probably are going to be terrorists when you let them go. And to be very honest, I think it was very convenient that we had all these convenient prison breaks just in time to recreate the Al-Qaeda threat when Obama really needed it. And I think these prison breaks were all inside jobs.
Yeah, it was coincided with the holiday there for the Muslim world there, too.
Yes. No, I think they just said, we've been telling everybody we've destroyed the Al-Qaeda leadership, we've got all the Al-Qaeda terrorists in jail. Nobody's going to believe a new Al-Qaeda terror threat unless all of a sudden, conveniently, Al-Qaeda is back in the wild, and I think that's why they did those prison breaks.
Sounds good to me. Have a good day there, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're coming up here on the end of a segment. Amazingly enough, over in the New York Times, they had an article which basically quoted government officials as saying the reason this whole terror threat was being fanned up now was to divert attention from the NSA uproar. And there's another interesting quote in there we'll talk about when we come right back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And so we're talking about this article in the New York Times, which actually quotes members of the United States government saying that right now was a good time to emphasize the terror threat in order to divert attention from the uproar over the NSA spying on law-abiding citizens. And that would even be better if the intercepts had uncovered a possible plot. So they were openly talking about this. We just got to gin this up to take the heat off the NSA, and the New York Times quoted them. Now, what's really interesting is there was another quote in there referencing back to a story that actually appeared in the Financial Times in July of 2010, and it was quoting Robert Shapiro, the former Clinton official and Obama supporter, who said, quote, this is in 2010, quote, he has to find some way between now and November of demonstrating that he is a leader who can command confidence, and short of a 9/11 event or an Oklahoma City bombing, I can't think of how he could do that, end quote. Which gets us back to Benghazi, which is back in the news. They've identified a patsy and said, this is the mastermind. We've got charges against him. This is the guy who did it. You've got to blame him. And there actually is an interview with this guy, this Libyan militant, in which and this is before he got charged, where he said, yes, I was there. I was outside directing traffic, and then I went inside to help with the wounded. So they've grabbed this guy who was there and admitted he was there and said, aha, this is the mastermind. And they're just piling on this to try and resell you the official story of what happened in Benghazi. Can you see how afraid they are when they push this hard, when it's a constant hard sell about Benghazi and now about Fort Hood, where the guy is going on trial? And they've got witnesses saying he was shouting Allah Akbar. They're hard selling the official story, and that is a dead giveaway. They know that people just don't trust them any longer. And if this government is dealing with a credibility crisis of epic proportions, it is the government's own fault because of the epic lies they have been shoveling at us for decades. Now, it's odd that the New York Times did include this quote, where people were saying that the reason this terror threat's being fanned up now was to save the NSA, when the editorial position of the New York Times seems to be that this is all really kind of cool. That, yes, we've got to watch everybody and everything and just have all that stuff for the security. And as we pointed out, the NSA spying on computers has actually made the nation much less secure. Because all the cyber criminals out there, the black hat hackers, they're finding all the back doors the NSA built into your tablets, your smartphones, your web browsers, your routers, and they're using them. And the government's attitude appears to be, well, it's a small price to pay for the security of the nation, meaning the security of their own jobs. Now, a story came out over at hstoday.us talking about the NSA's X key score system, where they can simply type in some unique identifier and immediately pull up in real time all their online internet activity. And the story is that it actually does quite a bit more than that. There's more information coming on out there. It has a search capability that reaches into the entire global telecommunications grid. It's complete surveillance on law-abiding citizens. And we all know that real criminals, like those Wall Street CEOs, and real terrorists are using private systems of communication and encryption the NSA cannot read. So all of this exists to keep an eye on you, to make sure you're not getting ready to stand up and demand emancipation from the slavery of private central banking. Now, Alan Grayson is out there trying to basically deflect some of the criticisms from the NSA. He's out there saying the NSA is not saying it's preventing terrorist attacks. You know, they're trying to find the information leading to the prosecution and so forth, but they're not actually saying that they can and will prevent terrorist attacks. And I think they're trying to lay the propaganda groundwork if there is a false flag terror attack, and most Americans are going to say, well, this proves TSA and Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and CIA are completely worthless. Let's shut them down and spend that money on our schools, roads, bridges, and hospitals. So now they're trying to backpedal and say, well, no, that's really not what we're there for. Okay, what are you there for outside of watching law-abiding citizens? If you're not there to prevent acts of terror. So they're trying to keep this thing going on here. The executive director of the ACLU is out there claiming the NSA is spying on him with no legitimate reason. That, of course, is a statement that could be made by 330 Americans and much of the rest of the world's population at this moment. Now, we're continuing to see the fallout of this revelation that all of this illegally obtained information on citizens is being handed to law enforcement, to the Drug Enforcement Administration, to various other law enforcement entities. All of it, of course, is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And how the DEA, knowing it was inadmissible evidence in a court of law, simply used the information to go back and recreate a phony investigative trail so they could go into court and say, oh, no, we didn't get this information from the NSA. We found this, we found this, we found this, we found this, and that's why you can convict and send the person to jail. And the problem with all of these online databases is they are not secure. They're already complaining that Obamacare's database is going to be started with known holes in it. It would be trivial for some government agent to go into the database and plant incriminating information to go after political targets, just like the IRS is going after political targets. There are no controls on this. There can't be when the entire system is itself illegal under the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, interesting revelation came out of this video that we posted to whatreallyhappened.com talking about the Crotch Bomber 2, where they claim to have thwarted another attempt at a crotch bombing by arresting the bomber before he even got on the plane. Huzzah, huzzah, victory for the United States and its intelligence agencies. Only it turned out the guy who was supposed to be the bomber was a CIA informant. This guy was not caught through NSA surveillance or intelligence activity. He worked for them. He called them up and said, look, some guys want me to blow up a plane. All right, we're going to arrest you and make you famous in the newspapers and then give you a new identity and let you go manage the Wendy's in Billings, Montana. They create the acts of terror to wave at you, to scare you back into obedience. Just like Adolf Hitler did with the phonied-up attack on the Gleiwitz radio station in Germany that launched the war into Poland, just like Hitler did with the Reichstag fire. It's all lies, fraud, and deception. And so this recent crotch bombing attack turned out to be a complete phony from beginning to end. The guy they arrested was a CIA informant. Now, Glenn Greenwald is out there announcing there are more U.S. spying revelations coming from the Snowden leaks, that he apparently is sitting on thousands and thousands of pages of documents not yet made public. I wish he'd stop announcing ahead of time he's going to do this because he's just asking to have his car explode. Personally, if I were Glenn Greenwald, I would dump it all now. Make it public to remove the motivation for some tragic accident to happen to him. His car blows up, he gets really depressed, goes for a long walk in the hills and commits suicide while still wearing cardiac monitor tape on his chest. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the toys are flying out of the crib over there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It is now official. Obama has canceled his planned meeting with Putin, supposedly over the fact that Russia gave asylum to Edward Snowden. I am not buying that one tiny bit. I think Obama, given how badly he got trounced in his last meeting with Putin regarding Syria, was looking for an excuse to cancel anyway. But to the rest of the world, it looks like Obama is throwing a tantrum. He's stamping his feet. The rest of the world won't do what he wants it to do. And it's just coming off, making this administration look more and more pathetic, more and more like it's completely out of control. They've handled this whole situation so badly from day one, and it's either Obama is getting really bad advice from his advisors, or he's not listening. Now, of course, here in the United States of America, the military-industrial complex is throwing parties and popping champagne corks and throwing confetti because, as Obama said, it looks like we're going back into the Cold War, blaming it on Russia. Russia is slipping back into the Cold War mentality. No, the U.S. has wanted to go back to the Cold War all along, because those were the glory days when they could just tell the American people any lie and it would be believed, and we were all brainwashed by public schools to wet ourselves on hearing the word commie, and there was never any questioning about the vast sums of the people's wealth that were poured into all these missiles and bombers and submarines and everything to hold those evil communists away. And it's not really working as well to keep those evil Muslims away. And we've seen more than a few indications that our government would dearly love to go back to the days of the Cold War, when there was this vast, powerful enemy on the other side of the globe that we had to be constantly preparing against. And of course, over in Russia, their version of the military-industrial complex was reaping vast sums of money out of the Russian people to be prepared for that enemy on our side of the planet. It was just a scam. When they got together, the Russian military leaders and the American military leaders would pat each other on the back. What a wonderful little scam they had going. Building all these weapons, spending all this money. The United States spends more on machinery of death than the next 26 nations combined, 25 of whom are supposedly our allies. And because the quality of America's weapons are in decline, along with the rest of our high technology and our manufacturing infrastructure, we may be spending much more than other countries on the machinery of death, but we may not be getting the bang for our buck. The F-22, after 4 years, still can't fix the problem where it's asphyxiating its own pilots. The F-35 has turned into one of the most costly jokes ever played on the American people. It's cost more than the gross domestic product of Australia to develop. They can't get it to work. The helmet control fire system has yet to be delivered. It can't dogfight. It can't fly in rain. The problems are endless. Naval version can't land on a carrier because they put the arrestor hook too close to the main landing gear. The Pentagon has already rewritten the requirements for that plane downward so they can say that the plane has met its requirements, and now they're openly talking about just dropping the whole program. After all that money was spent, they're just going to drop it. And I've pointed our listeners and readers to a book and a movie of the same name, The Pentagon Wars, about just how out of control government spending is on anything to do with the military. And I got to see some of this up close and personal myself, both when I worked for NASA many, many years ago, and more recently when I was working at a visual effects house in Hollywood called Robert Abel and Associates. And toward the end of its business lifetime, they started seeking government military contracts, and we got hired by Martin Marietta to help design the dashboards for the Star Wars program. And just the change in degree of spending that was out there to do all this stuff, and it was just amazing to see it. If you've never experienced it, basically what it is, you as the American citizen, you have a little tiny kitchen faucet that you can turn on to get your water. Anybody working in military development, they have fire hoses. That's the difference. It's a complete different way of living, complete different way of thinking about money. It pours just vast sums of money into this. And much of it winds up being completely wasted. Somebody sent me a picture the other day of a bolt being delivered at the end of the military supply chain. Single little bolt in a plastic baggie, and the invoice on it said $45. You can go down to the hardware store and get that exact same bolt for like 19 cents. It's just all about taking money away from you. Now, President Obama was on the Jay Leno show last night. He's done that before. Jay Leno talks about it, about how the Secret Service comes in and they walk through the production office and they say, you don't come into work tomorrow, and you don't come into work tomorrow, and you don't come into work tomorrow, to make sure the place is safe for the president. Stand out there glaring at the studio audience. And Obama sat there on Jay Leno's show and told the American audience, we don't have a domestic spying program. Really? And I don't think anybody was buying it, not even Jay Leno, because before Obama came out, Jay Leno did this joke about how Obama had sent McCain over to Egypt to see why their government has ground to a halt. And he said, how about solving the problems in this country that brought our government to a halt? And the audience roared and cheered. And I'm sure Jay Leno is going to be getting IRS audits every year for the rest of his working life. He is now probably on the White House special high-interest targets list. which means we're all in good company, those of us who are also on the White House SHIT list. Now, because the mishandling of the NSA spy scandal it has just spiraled out of control, and the rest of the world is literally ridiculing the U.S. government over all of this, they're back to trying the poison the well tactics that they were doing against Edward Snowden. When it first came out, they were planting stories on the net about how Edward Snowden revealed that, what were some of that yes, they had a captured alien flying saucer down in Roswell. There was another one that came out there really cooking. Today they're back to doing it again about how Edward Snowden has revealed HAARP is capable of sonic assassination. So clearly the U.S. government can't think of anything else to do, and they're going back to the same old poison the well propaganda tactics. First of all, HAARP, which if you believe the press has already been shut down as a complete and utter failure for its real purpose, which was a test platform for medium wave synthetic aperture radar. And it never worked with sound. And it wasn't a weather control machine. It's a very common tactic where the U.S. government is doing something they don't want people looking at, and they themselves will start the rumors about what's going on to lead people away in the wrong direction. And a classic example, of course, is alien spaceships, UFOs. And if you go back through history and you look at every single time when Hollywood would start putting TV shows on about space aliens and invaders and all the rest of that stuff, they overlap the development of the so-called Black Project aircraft. So that if you're out there driving across Nevada and you see a couple of $1 trillion of tax money flash overhead at Mach 5, what are you going to do? You run into town. I just saw an alien spaceship, just like on TV. And everybody's up looking at the sky, at the stars, and they're not looking at that hangar at the end of that runway out on that salt flat in the middle of Nevada. The whole purpose of the U.S. government's Project Blue Book was not to deny the existence of alien flying saucers, but to sell that idea to the public. So they weren't paying attention to top secret aircraft development, like the SR-71, the F-117, the Aurora, which appears to have been like the F-35, another failed project, and the early tests of the drones. So they're back out there with their poisoning the well tactics and saying, oh, Snowden is linked to HAARP, Snowden is linked to the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot's love child, Snowden is having lunch with Elvis, and all the rest of that stuff. And we recognize it for what it is. These tactics don't work any longer. But the government can't think of anything else to do. What the government could do to save itself right now, turn the situation around, is for Obama to get up there and hold a press conference and say, look, you guys are right. Previous administrations lied about, and go down the list of all the things we know the government lied to us about. The Kennedy assassination, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, on and on and on. The fact that Pearl Harbor wasn't a surprise, and just say, all right, look, that's a lousy way to run a country in the 21st century. We're going to make some changes here. But this government can't do that because the people who profited from those earlier lies are still in positions of power. And they are not the sort of people who can ever admit error or wrong, or certainly not take responsibility for their illegal and unconstitutional actions. So this government is stuck, which is why it is doomed to collapse. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And again, the corporate media, pardon me there, corporate media is trying to reinforce the official story regarding Benghazi, where they have found this known militant, Ahmed Katala, who is in Libya, who was seen on photos and videos near the consulate. And in an earlier interview, he said, yes, he was there. Like everybody else, he heard the shooting and he just came over to see what was going on. Spent part of his time directing traffic and the rest of the time helping the wounded. But the United States has said this was the mastermind. He was there. Oh, yes, if you're the mastermind of an attack on a U.S. consulate, you're going to be standing out there where all the cameras are going to see you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So they basically have found their patsy. And again, especially with the surfacing of this quote by Robert Shapiro, recognizing that Obama needed some kind of event to show that he was the commander-in-chief in order to win last year's election. Benghazi, I am pretty much certain, was set up to happen. We're getting a new timeline in which apparently Obama was notified of the attack on the consulate in Benghazi. Then he went to dinner, followed by a 2-hour phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu. Then he went back to the crisis room. Now, in theory, this is the new excuse coming out of Washington, D.C. The reason everybody was being told to stand down is an issue called cross-border authority, which rests solely with the president. And so as the attack on the consulate was getting underway, the one man who could authorize military intervention went to dinner and then took a 2-hour phone call with Netanyahu and only then went back and said, yeah, we can send in somebody to help. I'm not buying that one at all. It smacks very much of all these stories about how there were changes to the rules of engagement just before 9/11 that forbade Air Force bases from intercepting hijacked planes without the express authority of the Department of Secretary, who was conveniently out of position as 9/11 happened. And then after 9/11 was over, they changed the rules back to allow the commanders of air bases to intercept hijacked planes. This sounds like more of the same. They're just trying to figure out some way to deal with all the obvious inconsistencies in the story. I think it was an attempt to create that incident Robert Shapiro predicted in 2010 to allow Obama to look presidential, to prove he was not a new Jimmy Carter, he was not going to allow a new hostage crisis to happen. And it got out of control. It got out of control because whatever group was in there pretending to be Al-Qaeda started firing gunshots. All the Libyans living around the consulate said, yee-haw, party time, let's go watch them kick out the Americans. And it turned into a wild, uncontrollable riot in which the ambassador and the other people were all killed. And now they're trying to basically keep it cover up. And, oh, we've got a villain. This guy did it. This guy did it. Let us not give view to strange, weird conspiracy theories. Remember what Bush was saying about 9/11? The 9/11 truth movement really got going, and Bush actually had to respond to it and get up and say, let's not pay attention to strange conspiracy theories. Which, of course, got everybody scratching their head and saying, maybe it's time to look at those conspiracy theories if they're that worried. Now, Paul Craig Roberts just came out with another article which echoes something that I have been saying for quite some time. Washington thinks you are stupid. Washington believes that it can tell the population anything and the people will believe it out of a sense of loyalty and patriotism, no matter how absurd it is. And he goes on to point out about how the government says the recession began in December 2007, but it was over in June 2009, even though the vast majority of Americans are still seeing a decline in their earning ability, their standard of living, their opportunities for advancement, profit, and education. The vast majority of the population continues to sink further and further into poverty, and Washington, D.C. is saying, oh, no, the economy's doing great, really. You know, if you're hungry and homeless and starving, it's really all your fault, or it's the fault of all those pensioners that are destroying the city economies. You know, they should just go off and die and do the patriotic thing now that they're no longer useful to the state here. And, of course, don't forget all the other lies that have now been exposed. Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, the Gulf of Tonkin, there were no torpedoes, on and on and on. The list of official lies is virtually endless. Anyone who believes anything that Washington says is too naive to be allowed out in public. And people stay silent and nod and pretend to believe because they think that is what patriotism demands, and that, of course, is complete nonsense. Patriotism isn't loyalty to the government. Patriotism is loyalty to the country when the country itself is threatened by the government. I remember when Clinton was out there saying, oh, no, it's impossible to love your country and hate the government. Yeah, it is, because the government isn't the country. The country is 330 million Americans. Teachers, bricklayers, carpenters, doctors, bakers, road layers. That's America. We the people. That's America. When the government is at odds with the principles of America, when it's violating that Constitution, it very clearly is not the United States of America. It's just a group of people who've seized control and power for their own profit and glory. And it makes perfect sense that you would love your country, your neighbors, your friends, your family, the principles the nation was founded on, and inevitably come to feel quite hostile to a government that seems to have no regard whatsoever for constitutional limits, certainly no respect for the ordinary citizen, as demonstrated by their lack of respect for your privacy. They don't care about you at all. They don't. Their only interest in you is how much money they can take out of you, how many new soldiers and workers you can breed. That's it. They treat you like farm animals. Just like if you go to one of those big corporate farms that are raising livestock, chickens and cattle, they keep them in little cages. They decide what they're going to eat, what medications they're going to get, what they can't eat, what medications they can't have, and they run you around to maximize profit from you, and then when you are no longer of any use, they get rid of you. Washington, D.C. sees the 50 states as a giant human farm. We're not civilized, we're domesticated. Now, getting back over to the NSA, the NSA is causing a huge amount of damage for U.S. technology companies because all around the world and inside the United States of America, people are pulling off these giant network servers, these online social platforms, Facebook and so forth. They're abandoning the U.S.-based cloud servers that represented huge capital investments, and other nations are quick to pick up the slack. They're already starting new cloud-based servers in other countries that have a lot more respect for the privacy of their users. And it's now estimated that the United States cloud industry is going to lose somewhere in the neighborhood of $35 billion because of the fallout over PRISM. So the U.S. government, in demanding these American computer companies act as spies on the world, has effectively crippled those companies' ability to compete in the global marketplace. And it was all for nothing, because we've already demonstrated this system can't actually find real criminals or real terrorists. It's about spying on ordinary people. All right, we're going to take, well, actually, we're too close to the top of the hour break, so Kyle, just stay. I'm going to come to you as soon as we're back from the news break and station identification. All righty, so it's getting really ugly out there, and again, the worst part about all this TSA, DHS, all the rest of it, it really doesn't work. It was just a huge excuse to have this gigantic complex industry, the security industrial complex, reap huge sums of money off the American people by playing on their manufactured fears, and it doesn't actually work. And now American companies who were coerced into going along with this system may be driven out of business by this, because $35 billion, that's a big, big hit to your revenue stream. We'll be back after news break and station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking, we're going to go to the phones here. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, buddy. I wanted to go back to what you were saying about Benghazi, and there is a U.S. law, or if you're a juror and you're on a jury, you're instructed, if an eyewitness has been proven to lie about something, you have the right and, in fact, the duty to regard everything that they've said as a lie.
Well, that's just common sense.
Well, and that's also because a honest-to-goodness eyewitness without any dog in the fight will not have any reason to lie. I mean, sure, people witness things differently, but an open lie proves that there is an agenda there and that they have some benefit by the, by the verdict going one way or another.
Yes.
So we've proven in Benghazi lie after lie after lie that they've said about it.
Yes.
And there's absolutely no reason why anybody should regard anything that they say on the subject to be truthful. What you need to do is look at the evidence that we have that is known to be truthful, and Occam's razor. Whatever is the simplest, most correct answer, you have to go with.
Well, that's basically how I came to my conclusions about what happened at Benghazi, and you're absolutely correct. When you catch the government engaging in fraud just once, it means the entire story is a hoax, because if the government is telling you the truth about something, there is no need for fraud. And they know better than to risk the credibility of the story by engaging in fraud. So when you catch them in a single fraud, like 20 years ago when I found in the FBI's own FD-302s evidence they were manufacturing the testimony of Vincent Foster's widow, Lisa, regarding the identification of the gun. From that point on, it was obvious the official story had to be a completely made-up fiction. And that rule applies everywhere, whether it's Benghazi or 9/11 or Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Once you have the government in a proven lie, the entire official story can be dismissed. And you start looking at those facts you actually have at hand, and again, Occam's razor, find the simplest explanation that accounts for all of it.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you heard over here in Pennsylvania, right outside Bucks County, there was a shooting yesterday.
Yes.
The guy walked into a town hall, went crazy, started shooting people. If we're being spied upon and they're monitoring cell phones, emails, purchases, things of that nature, as a result of things like 9/11, the Aurora shooting, Sandy Hook, why is it that these people aren't being caught? That's what I want to know. Why is it that they're arresting women who are looking up pressure cookers on the internet, but people who are actually engaging in criminal activity or seem to be engaging in criminal activity aren't being pursued, aren't being arrested? They're not catching anybody.
Well, I'll give you one better that's more obvious. I just got word there's another scam that is making its way across America where you will get a phone call and the caller ID is all zeros. And the guy on the other end says, I represent this law firm, Dewey, Gougem, and Howe, and you are about to be sued unless you immediately settle with my client, and they give you someplace you can send some funds. And it's a complete scam. Now, in theory, the NSA has all this information to find the scammers. They're not doing a thing about it.
My aunt got caught about 6 months ago. She was driving along. She got a phone call. And if your son's been in a car accident, and then it turns into we're holding him hostage. If you don't send us $1,500 in the next 24 hours, we're going to, kill your son. And yeah, she unfortunately fell for it. But these people aren't being arrested.
No, they're not. They're not. They're absolutely not. The cyber criminals who are hacking into our systems using those NSA backdoors, apparently right now, 1 out of every 5 Americans, 20% of the American population, have been the victim of some kind of online computer fraud. And we get a few token arrests to make it look like the government's doing something about it. But if anything, ever since the revelation of the NSA spying on us all and PRISM, it seems like these attempts at cybercrime are actually going up. Somehow these cyber criminals know the NSA isn't going to be wasting any time tracking them down. They're just keeping an eye on Americans to make sure we're not going to stand up and demand emancipation from the Federal Reserve System. This is not about finding criminals or terrorists. It's all about keeping watch on law-abiding American citizens in order to deter an American spring. And the reason it's going to fail miserably is when it happens in this country, if it happens in this country, it will be spontaneous across the entire country at the same time. There is no leadership plotting revolution in some dark garret someplace. Look at what happened with the Arab Springs, for example, over in Egypt. There was no mastermind who said, I'm going to set up a plot to topple Mubarak. They just reached a flashpoint where the people had been abused to the point where they have no other option than saying, I'm tired of this government, I'm going to fight back. Like that shooting yesterday. Appears to have just simply been a case where the local city council wanted to take this guy's property and make him homeless. And he exhausted all the legal options. And he understood the legal system and the court system was biased totally in favor of the people who wanted to grab his land. And he fought back. And I don't approve of what he did, but I do understand why. We're at that point. Every week when my wife and I get involved in these programs to feed the hungry and the homeless, we're seeing all these Americans who spent their entire lives playing by the rules, doing the jobs they were supposed to be doing, filling out all the paperwork, paying all the taxes, and they have been abandoned by the system. and they're very, very angry. We know that right now there's a huge surge in suicides in America linked to the economy, and at some point that's going to start transitioning away from I'm going to kill myself to I'm going to kill the people who made me poor. And again, I don't encourage or approve of that, but I certainly understand why it's happening. So when the American Spring comes to the United States, it won't be an organized resistance with a leader. It's just going to flare up all across the country.
Absolutely, and it's not a coincidence that this guy who was having his land taken from him, I think he lived there for 35 years and they never gave him a hard time, but they were planning a very large development with a Walmart, a shopping center, a few other stores, and his land, I think like 100 feet or 100 yards of his land, somehow fell onto what they were trying to develop. And then all of a sudden it became well, you're in violation of this, you're in violation of that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I mean, the fact that corporations and benefactors and people who donate to politicians have a greater say than the everyman is going to be something that sets off the American Spring, as you put it. I truly believe that is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Well, I would rather see the government and banking system collapse to avoid bloodshed. That's sort of what I'm leaning toward. But we know the eminent domain laws exist to allow the government to take private land for public use. But over the last several years, we've seen this very horrible mutation where governments will say, if we take this land from its owner and give it to another owner, they'll do more with it and generate more tax revenue. And on that rationale, we've seen eminent domain across the country taking private homes where the people have just lived there for all their lives and they've paid all their taxes and done everything right. But, we're going to put up a strip mall on this land. We're rezoning and we're going to develop it here, and homes have been taken to turn over to the developers of golf courses, shopping malls. That's not what eminent domain is supposed to be about. And people are very, very angry at this very blatant misuse of the principle of eminent domain.
If you want about the surveillance state, I challenge anybody. Go onto Google, go onto Yahoo, go onto any internet provider, type in any of the major Hollywood movies that have come out this year. The first or second website you'll get will have the word torn in it. I guarantee if you click that website within 24 hours, your ISP will send you an email advising you not to go to that website.
That's entirely possible. I mean, the cybercrime is completely out of control. We got to take a break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently the TSA, the Tourism Suppression Agency, it's kind of hard to figure out where they've ranked now in the list of most hated government agencies. They used to be number 2 after the Internal Revenue Service. Now, basically, I think it's like a 12-way tie for first place, most hated federal government agency. But the TSA, not happy with having wrecked tourism by harassing people at the airports. And by the way, in all their years of operation, they've never actually caught a single real terrorist. They've groped a lot of people, probably helped spread a lot of sexually transmitted diseases, because they don't change those gloves in between each crotch they grope. Those gloves are for their protection, not for yours. Stolen a lot of stuff out of the luggage, dropped my laptop, and despite all of that, and given a lot of people, including themselves, skin cancer from those machines, but they haven't caught a real terrorist. Not happy with that. They are now spreading out across the country to have TSA crotch grabbers at sporting events, bus stations, train stations, shopping malls. It's getting a lot of complaints. And apparently the federal government's attitude is, if you don't want to be searched, then don't attend sporting events or conventions or go to the shopping mall. And I think that's a really good idea. Let's just stay home. And when those sporting events start going bankrupt, when those shopping malls continue, they're already going out of business across the country. And when the train and bus lines go into serious financial decline and start screaming bailout, we'll all point the finger of blame where it was supposed to be. The security industrial complex. Now then, article over at fourthmedia.org, Who Controls America and for Whose Interest? And they're pounding on an issue that a lot of people have pointed at over the years, which is this slavish obedience by the U.S. government to the interests of a foreign power, namely Israel. And now that we are in the congressional summer recess, a rather large chunk of the United States Congress, the finest politicians that money can buy, are over in Israel to get Israel's view of what's going on in the Middle East. They're not going over to talk to the people of Iran. They're not going over to talk to the people of Iraq or Afghanistan or Lebanon or any of those other places. It's all, we're going to go to Israel and get Israel's point of view, and that will set our foreign policy for decades to come. Meanwhile, of course, for all these members of Congress back in their home districts that they are paid to represent, they're a no-show. We don't care what's happening in our home districts. We got elected. We got the job. That's all that really matters. And now we're off to Israel to get our picture taken in front of the Wailing Wall, wearing a yarmulke to prove that we're loyal to Tel Aviv, so that AIPAC will give us money for re-election. And I think Americans are getting fed up with it. I know there's some polls out there lately where this slavish obedience by the U.S. government to a foreign government is of mounting concern among the American population. Meanwhile, of course, Netanyahu is out there urging increased U.S. pressure on Iran. You got to go out and get them. He's basically saying that, Iran is continuing its nuclear program. Israel's been screaming that Iran is months away from a nuclear bomb going back to 1985. And he's saying the U.S. has to keep up the pressure. Ever notice how every time Israel speaks, it's the U.S. that has to do something? Because frankly, Mr. Netanyahu, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle. But I, like most Americans, am sick and tired of seeing American kids getting killed in wars on Israel's enemies, mostly because it's a fool's errand. As long as Israel continues to get Americans to fight the wars for them, they're going to go on making enemies faster than the U.S. can kill them. Now, Israel is supposed to be an independent nation for the safety and security of the Jewish people. And after more than 60 years, it is time for Israel to be independent, to fight their own wars, and to stop surviving and profiting on financial handouts from the rest of the world. The current generation of Israel's political leadership seems to view it as their divine right that America is there to pay all the bills and provide all the soldiers for whatever Israel wants to do. And that means that Israel doesn't have any incentive to stop being aggressive because their kids aren't fighting those wars. The last time they fought one was in Lebanon. They didn't do very well. They don't have a reason to perhaps control some of the out-of-control government spending because the U.S. picks up the tab. If Israel wants to be an independent nation for the safety and security of the Jewish people, fine, that's a noble, laudable ideal. But everything that Israel's government is doing actually makes the world more dangerous for the Jewish people. And having already cost the American taxpayers more than 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program, Israel cannot be called independent. Now, over at Veterans News Now, they've got an article, Soraya Sepapur Ulrich, on Iran's political course after the elections, basically selling the idea that it doesn't matter that Ahmadinejad is gone, that Iran is still seeking nuclear power. And they will not give up their right to nuclear power, nor should they. Both the United States of America and Iran have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which allows Iran to have nuclear power stations, medical isotopes, other benign industrial uses of nuclear technology. Under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the United States is supposed to be in Iran helping them build power stations, medical isotope facilities, which is a really good way of making sure that's all they are, and that there isn't a clandestine bomb factory underneath the power station like Israel has underneath Dimona. So by ignoring their obligations under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and by using sanctions and the threat of military force to coerce Iran into surrendering their rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty recognized by the United States when they signed, it is the United States that is in violation of international law and that treaty. It is the United States that is ignoring its international obligations. Meanwhile, there's a very alarming article coming out of the Ugly Truth WordPress. The former intelligence chief of the IDF is out there saying that the U.S. is coming around to an Israeli strike on Iran, which is kind of a bogus statement. The United States could hardly stop them. But Israel wants to make it look like the U.S. is green-lighting this. The U.S. doesn't dare red-light it. They'll lose all that AIPAC funding for the next round of Congress here. Meanwhile, Israel is spending so much of your money on those illegal settlements in the West Bank that Israelis are actually leaving Israel itself and heading for the West Bank settlements because they're much better places to live. And all of this is illegal. And it just turns all Kerry's talk about a peace process in two states into a gigantic joke. Israel's trying to create a larger, greater Israel on the ground. Facts on the ground. The United States is trying to regain its image as an impartial, objective arbiter in the discussions between Israel and Palestine. But I don't think anybody's fooled by that any longer. Because the United States could stop Israel's behavior in a heartbeat by stop signing those checks. But every time it's come up as a means of getting Israel to tone down, what we hear from the United States Congress is that funding to Israel is off the table, cannot be touched, it's the third rail. And if we can't stop payment on those checks to Israel, we can't control Israel. Because Israel, that's all they listen to. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I just got an interesting email I want to read to you here. Sending my sincere greetings to you. My mail might come as a surprise to you since we've not met before. However, the journey of 10,000 miles starts with a step. Let me start by introducing myself to you. I'm blah, 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 blah. Presently in Malaysia seeking gold buyers. Get back to me. Now, obviously, this is another variation on the Nigerian scam. Hi, I'm the widow of a deposed foreign leader. I need your help to get my money out of the country, and we all know these scams are out there. And again, if the NSA is monitoring all of our emails, why are they not going after the scammers? If they wanted to salvage their reputation as being necessary and acceptable in American society, we should be seeing thousands of cyber criminals, thousands of email scammers, thousands of malware writers, and thousands of Wall Street CEOs behind the mortgage-backed security fraud of 2008 getting their perp walk into prison. Why are we not seeing it? Every one of these scams that we see is a reminder that the NSA spying on all Americans is not about fighting crime, not about fighting terror. It's all about watching you to keep you enslaved. Just want to hit that point a little tiny bit. All right, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. We're about halfway through the program here. We're getting a report that Israel has once again had an incursion into Lebanon. They crossed the border into Lebanon, and apparently one of them stepped on a landmine, and 4 Israeli soldiers have been injured. Oh, feel bad for the Israeli soldiers. Look, if you don't want your soldiers to get harmed, stay out of other people's countries. But obviously we're seeing Israel start to probe along the border. Where can we get through? They're getting ready for another invasion. They want that Litani River. Over in Tunisia, major protests, mass protests. The headline said thousands, but if you look at the photos, it looks like Tahrir Square over in Egypt. And they want the government as a whole to resign. So this is spreading all over the globe. This push for a global New World Order fascist economic dictatorship has brought the world to the edge of a global revolution in which all the private central banks are brought down at the same time. And that will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to restart the planet without this form of enslavement. Now, rule by divine right had to go away. Slavery had to go away. There's still some vestiges of it, but pretty much the entire world has realized slavery is not legitimate. And it's time for rule by compound interest to join them in history's dustbin. Because it's not working. The only legitimate form of governance for any nation is self-governance. Not the illusion of self-governance, which is what we're being fed on a daily basis, but true self-governance. When we talk about the blueprint for the new America, I see a government that is little more than a caretaker, and their only authority is to make sure the infrastructure is repaired, the schools are working, the hospitals are healing the sick. And all major governmental national policy decisions are put to direct vote of the general population. We have the technology to do it. So when the government is out there saying, should we give more money to Israel, that goes to a general vote of the entire American people. When they say, should we invade XYZ country who has not invaded us, that goes to a vote of the entire American people. When the government is thinking we need to take trillions of dollars from the American people and give it to the banks so the banks can loan it back to the American people at interest, that above all should have gone to a general vote of the American people. Down in Argentina, their new president, Cristina Fernandez, is showing a great deal of cojones. She's up there openly criticizing the Security Council's permanent membership for the continuous vetoes against the Palestinians and to protect Israel. So South America is starting to stretch their muscles. They realize the age of the American empire is at its end. For all this talk about the project for the new American century, it's already falling apart. Remember when Hitler started the 1,000-year Reich, and it only lasted 12 years. So here we are in 2013, and it looks like it's crumbling. The war agenda isn't working. They're flinging death all over the globe, and all they're doing is alienating those few nations who still might be predisposed to support U.S. policy overseas. Over in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe won re-election at an overwhelming landslide victory against his U.S.-backed opposition that was fighting tooth and nail, including apparent massive vote fraud that fell short, to get him out of power. And the reason the U.S. wants him out of power is he is getting ready to nationalize foreign-owned assets inside Zimbabwe, meaning primarily the mines, and returning them and their profits to the people of Zimbabwe. And I think Mugabe just made the White House's special high-interest targets list. Because those private central bankers just don't like the idea of the people of a nation owning the oil, the copper, the molybdenum, the gold, the diamonds. They want it all privatized. And that's a big part of this war agenda, going into countries that want to sell their resources for the currency of their choosing and put the profits back into the nation. That's why they were so eager to get Hugo Chavez out of power. Because he had a bad habit of selling his oil for currencies around the world and using the money for the welfare of the people of the nation. And that can't be allowed to happen. Now, the stock market took a bit of a drubbing around the world last night. The Asian markets were down. I'm looking at the American markets. The plunge protection team is busy doing their best to get it back up to at least nudge the green, so that all those Wall Street firms who bought huge blocks of stock to try and keep the market up don't go instantly insolvent. And I was noticing the corporate media was out there saying, don't worry, this market downturn, it's just the summer slump. There's nothing to worry about, really. When the market goes up, it's touted as a victory for the American financial system, and when it goes down, oh, don't pay attention to that. It's the summer slump. By the way, gold is now heading back up. Was heading down for 6 weeks because of the overflooding of these gold futures contracts. Now they're having to pull back on those because there just simply isn't enough physical gold out there to satisfy those contracts. Going to take a phone call here. Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mike. Excellent point you brought up about that congressional delegation going to Israel. I see it's led by Congressman Steny Hoyer, along with Joseph Kennedy III, and they're bringing over 36 Congress members to travel across Israel for the week. Now, Mike, wouldn't it be wonderful if you can get 36 Congress members to travel across America for a week and see the food lines, see the food banks, see the Goodwill stores packed, see the crumbling infrastructure in this country?
They don't need to travel across America. They just need to go back to their home districts.
You're right. But it just shows that, that the foreign influence of Israel over Congress is so demanding that even when our U.S. Senator Rand Paul stood up before Congress and wanted to cut aid to Egypt, Israel lobby was a chief proponent of funding aid to Israel, $1.5 billion. Now, think about that, Mike. Think about what $1.5 billion poured into our infrastructure to fix our roads and our bridges, to fix some of our highways. No, because it's true what you're saying, Mike. It's not our Congress. We just like to have our country back for just a while, just to fix our problems here, not worry about the Middle East problems. Let's fix our problems here, Mike. Can we just do that?
Well, that's what I would like to see done. I'd like to see him. I'd like to put America first, second, third. I'd like to have a central government that puts America first, second, third, but they clearly don't. If you look at the voting record in Congress, all these contentious, controversial issues come up. It's always a barely, a cleanly divided House, and a victory or loss is usually by a narrow margin. But when something comes up for Israel, it's overwhelmingly majority, if not unanimous. In that one area, in regard to Israel, all of Congress marches in complete goose step. But here in the United States of America, it's go away, don't bother us, you're being an anti-Semite. And it really is shameful. And apparently nobody in Washington, D.C. has any sense of decorum or shame, with rare few exceptions, like Cynthia McKinney and Ron Paul, and they're now, of course, been kicked out of the party. But it's an absolute scandal how a government that promotes itself as representing the will of the American people is just obsessed with Israel all the time. And that has got to stop. Absolutely. Okay, we got to take...
You're absolutely right. Right, you're absolutely right, Mike. Excellent job.
All right, thanks. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Getting back to the economy. Over in Cyprus, as is perhaps not unexpected, depositors over there are starting to try and find ways to push back against the haircut or scalping or castration, depending upon how much money you lost, and they're trying to do it through the civil court system. They're filing lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit against their banks to try and find some way to block the confiscation of their money, or to recover, because the money's already gone. And they're trying to basically go through the court system to recover the money that was stolen from them to cover the bank's own failings. A model that is now being adopted all across Europe. We know it's in next year's plan for Canada's finances, and they're starting to openly talk about it here in the United States of America, despite prior assurances following the Cyprus haircut that it could never, ever, 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 ever come to the United States of America. This is bank robbery by the banks. And they try and couch it by saying, well, really, when you put your money in a savings account, you're actually really an investor in the bank, and therefore you should absorb the bank's losses. No, that's not the way it's supposed to work. You, the bank, are borrowing my money to do your business. And if you do your business bad, that doesn't get you off the hook to return my money to me. But right now, the legal system in every nation with a private central bank is being warped to favor those bankers, because they know they're at the end of their little pyramid scheme scam, and it's edging further and further out over the cliff towards complete collapse. And so whatever they think they need to do, up to and include confiscating your personal physical gold and silver, they're going to do. And the government will say, oh, yes, it's necessary to protect the safety and trustworthiness of our financial system. And that's already gone. So the people in Cyprus are trying to go through the court system, and when they realize the court system is not on their side or not arbitrary or unbiased, that's when things will start to get really ugly in Cyprus. And the U.S. will send in the military. We must restore order there. We must convince the people of Cyprus that this robbing of their money by the bankers was right, just, and moral. Meanwhile, we're getting an interesting story over at silverdoctors.com from Jim Willey. The current estimation of the amount of physical gold that has been inappropriately rehypothecated from allocated accounts is now up around 60,000 tons of gold. This is a huge scam, a huge scandal, and it affects virtually every bullion bank out here in the West. We know it affects the New York Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Bank of France. And what's been going on is banks, investors, governments will invest in gold and then pay these companies a vaulting fee to store their allocated gold. That when they use the phrase allocated gold, it means you own these particular pieces of gold in our vault, and we will keep them there. But what these bullion banks have been doing is taking that gold on deposit and leasing it out the back door. So they're making money off the vaulting fees, they're making money off the leasing fees. That gold is being leased out, I think, primarily to satisfy the glut of gold futures contracts that were put out to keep gold prices down. And now they're all coming due, and most of the customers do not want to settle for the cash equivalent plus an uplift, so they're leasing the gold out the back. And so now they're in this horrible situation because they have all these gold futures contracts out there. There isn't enough gold to satisfy them. And now the people whose gold was on deposit in the bullion banks are getting very nervous about it. Like Germany, that asked for its gold bullion back from the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve, and the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve shuffled their feet and looked down guiltily and said, oh, it's going to take us a few years to do that, then promptly invaded Mali, which happens to be Africa's third largest gold producer. And so the financial system has been playing fast and loose with deposited, allocated gold. And according to Jim Willey, the total scandal is now 60,000 tons of gold. Where do you think they're going to try and recover that much gold to make good on all the contracts, or be able to return to the people whose gold that's supposed to be? As soon as they get the guns from the American people, they will call for more gold confiscation like Roosevelt did in 1933. Because no sacrifice of the American people is too great to keep the banks in business another day longer. Jim Willey's also out there saying that he's starting to see a chain reaction of the failures in the financial system. We know there are little breaks, little problems, little scandals coming out, but they're starting to get larger and larger, to the point where these faults are going to start linking up to lead to a major failure. When we talk about metal fatigue, and as a metaphor, I'd like to use that incident we had here in Hawaii some years back, where one of the island-hopping planes was just flying back and forth, and all of a sudden the top of the cabin blew off. And what it was is because of the short cycles, where the plane is going up and down more than it's just staying level in the air, the metal was fatiguing more quickly. And little tiny cracks were developing, no big deal, until the cracks start to join up, and that's what leads to a major explosive blowout. And Jim Willey is saying he's seeing the same kind of signs in the structural elements of the financial system, where each new failure is triggering other failures down the road. And all of this papering it over with $85 billion a month coming out of the Federal Reserve isn't going to be able to keep up with it. I know the Fed keeps talking about tapering off quantitative easing, but they can't do it, because the instant they do, the stock market will plunge, and all the Wall Street firms holding those giant blocks of stock are going to be instantly insolvent, unless the U.S. government buys up those blocks of stock and jumps them on the American people, which probably exactly what they're planning on doing. Now, we've been talking a lot about Detroit's bankruptcy, and they are hardly the only one. New York City apparently is edging closer and closer to the point where they're going to have to declare bankruptcy. Mayor Michael Bloomberg is out there warning, in between telling you you cannot have large sodas, that New York City runs a real risk of bankruptcy. Why? Well, government overspending is part of it. The forcing down of wages and salaries that lowers tax revenues is a big part of it. There are 20 cities in America that are hovering at the edge of bankruptcy. And according to this article over here in Newsmax.com, they're saying many of the 61 largest U.S. cities are plagued with the same kind of retirement legacy costs that sent Detroit into Chapter 9 bankruptcy this summer. Oh, yes, let's blame the retirement costs. It's all the fault of those old people who spent their entire lives working for the government that wants to solve its financial problems by breaking the agreement with their own workers. But let's never, ever, ever mention the fact that it was the 2008 crash of Wall Street's mortgage-backed securities fraud that caused this problem. Because remember, Wall Street's own pet ratings agencies rated these mortgage-backed bundles as AAA. That made it legal for pension funds to invest in them. And when the whole fraud fell apart, pensions across America were defunded. That's why cities and businesses are in financial trouble trying to meet their pension obligations. It's not the pensioners. It was they got scammed as part of the mortgage-backed security fraud. But nobody wants to stand up to the bankers. It'll affect your credit rating, for goodness sake. They just want the old people to patriotically die off now that they're no longer useful to the system. New York Times is reporting Chicago is looking at having to slash their pensions, break their agreement to their workers, because their pension funds invested in the mortgage-backed securities and were defunded when it fell apart. There's a wonderful line in Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, where Brother William of Ockham says, the poor are always made to pay for all, and it's certainly never more true than in the current United States of America, where no matter what fraud, what scam, what corruption is going on in Wall Street and Washington, D.C., they will work together united to find some way to dump the losses onto ordinary people. Going to take a break for news and station identification. Back with our third hour after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're in our third hour. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Dan the man is sitting in our control room now, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. We're still talking about the economy. Obama is now out there campaigning to basically remind America that he really does care about what you're doing and what you're going through, and how he is now pushing for a new reorganization or revival or a retrofit of the mortgage assistance program for Americans. He's going to come out and overhaul the mortgage industry, and he's calling on Congress to shut down Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, ostensibly because of the huge government taxpayer bailouts that were necessary back in 2008. And it sounds good as a soundbite, but what that will simply mean is the banks and mortgage companies will now assume the entire risk for the mortgages, and when they go bust, they're still going to get government bailouts. So basically, Obama is going to fire a lot of government workers who will not be able to find jobs in the private sector, and he will not have reduced the risk of future taxpayer bailouts going into this mortgage industry, because mortgages are hideously expensive, because houses are hideously expensive, because they are kept that way by keeping empty homes off the market. As we reported yesterday, there are enough vacant houses in the United States of America to house the entire population of Great Britain. And they are kept off the market in order to artificially prop up housing prices. Because the banks can't stand the idea of a house costing only $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 where you could move in and pay it off in a few years, like you pay off your car. Because after that, you're of no more use to those bankers. Their goal is that you spend your entire lifetime in debt to them. It is the very essence of the banking industry to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, slaves to debt. Wonderful quote from the movie The International, which was actually a very good movie, but for reasons that should be obvious, kind of got dissed and dismissed and trivialized and marginalized by the corporate media. Now, we were talking with one of our callers earlier today about the abuses of eminent domain and seizure. In fact, I got an email from somebody pointing out how an entire neighborhood near the airport in Las Vegas was seized through eminent domain. The people whose homes were taken were told, we're going to make sure you have a much better lifestyle where we're moving you to. That didn't happen. Why did they seize this chunk of property by the airport? Well, to put up a Walmart and some other commercial ventures that can generate more tax revenues. And they're telling you it's legal, but is it just? We already know from World War II that just because something is the letter of the law doesn't make it right. Everything the Nazis did was the letter of the law. under the political system in power, but we look back and realize it wasn't right, it wasn't moral, it wasn't just. We can point to laws here in the United States of America, such as back when slavery was legal, and say those were unjust laws. They were wrong, they were immoral. And the same thing applies today. There are laws out here in this country that are designed to plunder the people for the benefit of the banks, and the time has come to stand up and say, I will not respect or obey this law. It is unjust, it is immoral. Now, getting back over to the issue of civil forfeiture, this was originally started back in 1984 as part of the Omnibus Crime Bill that Congress passed. And they had a little provision in there where local police departments would get a share of assets seized during drug raids. And that created a financial incentive for the police to stop investigating ordinary crimes, rapes, muggings, and so forth, and try and generate seizure opportunities, because they would personally profit. And it led to a lot of abuses. I remember one very famous case in Southern California where there was this guy who owned this very beautiful piece of property out in Malibu, and the police were looking at it and saying, boy, if we could just find some drugs on his property, we could confiscate that property, sell it off, think of how much money would come into our coffers. The chief could get a new, bigger luxury car. We could get air conditioning in the offices. And they raided the property, and during the raid, the homeowner got shot. Did not find any drugs at all. Another case, I think the Philadelphia Inquirer reported on this, where the police and DEA seized the home of this couple that had been living there their entire lives because they found a single marijuana seed that a friend of their son's had carelessly dropped on the property. One little seed, and they took the property. And the problem with civil forfeiture is because they're talking about things, those remaining constitutional civil protections don't apply. There's no presumption of innocence. In fact, it's a return to the Napoleonic Code. We found a marijuana seed on your property, therefore we presume you are guilty of being a major drug trafficker. You have to prove you are not to get your property back. And the way the scam works is they'll hang on to the property for a long time and come back a few months later and say, look, we'll give you back half your money if you will stop all legal proceedings to recover. And most people go for the deal. It's pillaging the population. Back in Southern California, I knew somebody who owned a garden shop. And back then, buying stock for your garden shop was pretty much a cash and carry business. And this guy was on the way to a trade show and was stopped at the airport because he had $9,000 in his pocket, and the police took it on suspicion of drug trafficking. No other evidence. The volume of cash was considered evidence of drug trafficking. And this guy couldn't get his money back, couldn't buy new stock for his shop, and he was driven out of business. We're at the stage in our nation's history where government is pillaging the people through civil forfeiture, through excessive traffic fines, speed cameras. They're not interested in fighting crime. They're not interested in saving you from crime. They're just part of the mechanism to plunder the people, to prop up a system hovering at the edge of collapse. Another article on the same situation, this is out of Business Insider, how terrifying drug raids became a cash cow for America's police. This was what was behind that story we were talking about, where a fusion center had records of this family buying Grow-Lux bulbs. These are fluorescent bulbs that are heavy in the ultraviolet. They're used for indoor gardening. Oh my goodness, they got to be growing marijuana in their basement. Police kicked down the door. Turned out the family had a non-GMO indoor vegetable garden to help feed themselves in these hard economic times. And they kicked down the door because they were expecting to find marijuana plants, and they were going to seize the house and sell it and just have more money to play with over at the police department. It's a completely out of control situation. We're financially incentivizing the police brutality that has afflicted this land. Got a video that we linked to over at whatreallyhappened.com. There's a TV news show, and I'm embarrassed to admit I forget which one it is, where they're talking about the child sexual predator scandal. And they're sensationalizing it, and they set up a sting house with a very young woman who looks much younger than she is, and they basically troll the internet looking to lure people in to come to the house thinking they're going to have sex with this underage girl. And they videotape them there, and then they arrest them and take them away. It is entrapment by any reasonable definition of the word, and they snared a cop in it. So, now I want to move on to something else we've talked about before. There's an article we've linked to whatreallyhappened.com. America's 50 Worst Charities Exposed. And it turns out that a lot of these charities you see advertising online and on the corporate media are basically money-making scams that so far are pretty much being ignored by the Internal Revenue Service rules regarding how much money you must be donating to the charity you are claiming to collect for. When we come back from this commercial break, I'll give you some more details about that. It's something you need to be aware of that's going on out there. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, when you're running a charitable institution, there are legal requirements regarding how much of the money you collect must be spent on whatever the stated objective of the charity is. But we are seeing this article came out of Mercola.com talking about the scourge, the epidemic of charities operating inside the United States of America who are basically raising millions of dollars and pretty much keeping it for themselves and their sponsors. Now, the law is if you are a nonprofit charitable organization, you must spend at least half the money you collect on your stated charity. And there are some good charities out there, but there's a lot of opportunity for scammers to come in. And what's really interesting, at a time when we are being told the Internal Revenue Service is going after political dissidents, they don't seem to really be at all concerned about these charities that are out there. And the Tampa Bay Times, Center for Investigative Reporting, and CNN all partnered in a year-long investigation looking at these. And they cited as one example the Kids Wish Network, which was trying to cash in on the name value of Make-A-Wish. And they basically took in millions of money, $100 million, and really didn't put much of it into the stated charity. Let me give you a couple of examples here. They had a list of 50. I've got the top 10 here posted to whatreallyhappened.com. The Kids Wish Network raised $127.8 million. They spent 2.5% of that actually doing something for the kids. The Cancer Fund of America, and you have to be very careful with these names because they are names that are intentionally similar to other real charities. So you don't want to be careless with the name because you might actually be attacking a charity that's legit. But there's a lot of illegit ones. Cancer Fund of America raised $98 million, spent 0.9% on actual charitable work. Children's Wish Foundation raised $96.8 million. They spent 10.8%. Which is a lot better than some of the predecessors there. The American Breast Cancer Foundation raised $80 million, spent 5.3% on actual charitable support work. The Firefighters Charitable Foundation raised $63 million, spent 8.4% of that actually doing good. Breast Cancer Relief Foundation, that's a big hot topic, so a lot of these scammers are taking advantage of the name. Raised $63 million, donated only 2.2% of that to actual charitable work. The International Union of Police Associations, AFL-CIO, raised $57 million, spent 0.5% on actual charitable work. Rented lips. National Veterans Service Fund, $70 million, only 7.8% of that went to actual charitable work. American Association of State Troopers raised $45 million, spent only 8.6% of that on the state troopers. Children's Cancer Fund of America raised $37 million, spent only 5.3% on actual charitable work. Now, there are laws saying that if you are a charitable organization, you have to spend at least 50%, and none of these charities do, and so far they're getting a free pass from the Internal Revenue Service. So, I don't know, maybe they're covered for somebody's intelligence operation, or they're just being run by favored political cronies. But it's a huge, huge scandal. If you see a need in your community to help others, and I can't imagine any place in this country where that need is not visible daily, get involved directly. When my wife and I go down to these two programs that we are supporting to help feed the hungry and the homeless, 100% of every penny we spend, we hand directly into the hands of these people in the form of food packages. We go out, buy the stuff, make up the packages, hand it out. There's no overhead. We're not paying an ad agency. We're not paying people to go out and raise money on our behalf. 100% goes out there. And you should be doing exactly the same. These scams operate by advertising to you on TV. They tap into your awareness there is need out there, and they say, send us a check and we'll take care of it for you. And you sign a check and you send it in thinking, I've done all I need to do to make a better world. And you're being scammed by it. If you want to make a better world, nobody's going to do it for you. You have to go out and make it better yourself. And it's a huge scandal. And it's the backside of the IRS scandal, where they're targeting the Tea Party, targeting political dissidents, targeting GOP donors for audits. But they're turning a blind eye to these ongoing scam charities. By the way, if you want a job with 239 days of vacation time every year, become a member of Congress. That's another scandal out there. This is over at PolicyMike.com. Now, I understand members of Congress need time to go back to their home districts to listen to the concerns of their constituents, look around their neighborhoods and see how things really are working. But again, we're in summer recess, and a huge chunk of the Congress are now over in Israel on their free, paid-for by AIPAC subsidiary trip to Israel to get their picture taken at the Wailing Wall and to prove their obeisance to Tel Aviv. I think somebody ought to change the locks on their office doors while they're gone. More concern coming out over Obamacare and a growing awareness. This is over at CNN. When they talk about places like Indiana that are going to get hit really hard, they're saying prices are going to raise 72%. And it turns out what they're talking about is the increased cost of providing care because of regulatory compliance with Obamacare. The actual cost of care itself is going up 72%. That is not including increases to the premiums on your health insurance coverage, which are also going up and are a source of immense profit for the health insurance companies. We saw the same thing back when auto insurance was made mandatory, and the auto insurance company said, we've got them. They don't have a choice anymore. They're going to come to one of us, so we'll all set our prices high and our payouts and service low, and we will be happy and rich. Obamacare is nothing more than a blatant giveaway to the health insurance companies. They wrote most of the legislation. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, apparently the computer system that is being built to computerize every American's medical records, and which will no doubt be backdoored by the NSA, is months behind on its testing for data security. And according to this article that we're getting in moneynews.com, they are planning on activating it on schedule October 1st, even though it's known to have major security holes in there. Now, my objection to computerized records, besides the potential for abuse, people finding out about your medical history, things that you don't want them to know, is it makes it easier for hospitals and doctors who screw up to go in and change the records to absolve themselves of any blame. There's no permanent record in a computerized system. And we know medical mistakes are a leading cause of death in this country. You are thousands of times more likely to be killed by accident by your doctor or pharmacist than by an act of terror. And this Obamacare system is set up so that somebody can just go into the computers and change the actual medical records to say, we did nothing wrong, it was all the patient's fault or somebody else's fault, you can't sue us. There is no provision in there for guaranteeing the permanence of the data that's entered in there by the doctors and physicians. They can go back and change and edit all they want. There's no provision to protect the integrity of those medical records in the case of malpractice. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And down in Florida, a little while ago we were talking about this huge scandal up in Canada involving the residential schools for Aboriginal children funded by the Canadian government and run by the Catholic Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada. The hideous record of abuse, medical experimentation, sexual abuse, and even death that occurred within those walls. And just to make our Canadian listeners feel a little bit better, there is a growing scandal surrounding the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. And the school operated between 1914 and 1952, and following its closure over reports of excessive brutality against the boys that were sent there, allegations of outright death surfaced. And now researchers have been given the go-ahead to start a process of excavating the grounds to exhume the bodies of the boys who were basically killed at this school. So it's not just Canada. And I don't know what it is. I think when you set up an institution where somebody's placed in authority, it does things to their head. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is why when the Founding Fathers set up this country, knowing that political power will attract the people who shouldn't be allowed to have it, they set in checks and balances to remind the rulers, this is what you're allowed to do. And these things you are not allowed to do. And if you do them, you're no longer the legal, legitimate rulers of this land. And our failure as the American people is we didn't hold that government to its contract. That, of course, is something that can be corrected somewhere down the road. I still think this financial system is on the verge of imploding, and when it goes, it will take the federal government with it. I have no doubt the federal government will stand up and say, it wasn't our fault, just trust us and we'll get it going again. Well, they have been telling us the economy was back on track ever since 2009, and looking around your hometown, you can tell that's just another government lie. So it's time to basically reset the system and to keep in mind our blueprint for the new America and learn from past mistakes of generations of Americans and corruptions of the government, to learn what Russia did right following the collapse of the Soviet Union, what they did wrong, and move forward to design a new nation that serves we the people. Now, getting on to some computer stuff and intellectual property rights, apparently Comcast, which now owns NBC Universal, which, by the way, is one of the IPs that was looking into my NSA challenge. So somebody over there is paying attention. They're now trying a new approach to urge downloaders of copyrighted material to buy. And again, I am not on the side of the copyright pirates. Fair is fair is fair. If they're developing something that's good enough to watch, it's good enough to pay for, in order that you get more good quality products. Unfortunately, I think a big reason that we're seeing NBC Universal and all of the corporate media outlets in such serious financial decline is they keep putting out the same politically correct stuff over and over and over again. How many versions of Superman can we see? How many reruns can we watch? But apparently they're now putting out pop-ups as a form of malware, so that if you're looking at something online, it'll pop up and say, wouldn't you really rather prefer to buy this? And I know it sounded good in the business meeting, but it isn't what works in reality. Go down to a shopping mall, and if you look at a successful business, you'll see a business that's inviting and friendly, and you just feel like you want to go in and spend your money. But if you go to like those kiosks selling that Dead Sea Cosmetics, and it's surrounded by people who come up and just throw samples in your face and say, don't you want to buy this? Don't you want to buy this? Don't you want to buy this? And you turn off and you say, I don't want to go there anymore. And Comcast is using the same approach to deal with content piracy, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work. The way to get around piracy is added content, which a lot of these outlets are starting to do, where you will get the movie on the DVD with all kinds of goodies that weren't there in the theater or the original broadcast. And that makes it worthwhile getting the DVD. It really does. But again, if you want your sales to go up, you got to come up with new, more entertaining, less propagandistic offerings for the American people. Okay. All right, let's see. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Werner in New Brunswick. Aloha, Werner. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. I just turned in there, and you mentioned there about some of those residential schools and
yes.
what happened here in Canada.
Yes.
And what makes me very much upset is about the role the Royal Canadian Mounted Police has played over the last 100 years in basically by force removing the Native children from their families.
Mm-hmm.
And then not doing any kind of a follow-up over the last 100 years, what happened to about 50,000 of those children that perished in those schools?
Well, the idea was, from the Canadian government's point of view, was to take the children from their parents and put them in a school in order to give them the education necessary to function in the modern Canadian society. And these schools, because they were being run by the church, they took it as their agenda to Christianize these children by hook or by crook, and continue a pattern of physical and sexual abuse that seems to be endemic in these institutions. Plus, they were used for medical experiments, forced sterilizations, and it just got completely out of control. In the long run, very few of the students who survived those schools did have the education necessary to integrate into the Canadian society. So it was not only a horrible scandal of abuse, and what amounts to war crimes, doing medical experiments on people without their permission. That's international crime there. But they basically failed in their stated objective as well.
Plus, there is the other aspect. Plus, those organizations, they were being given huge tracts of native land.
Yes.
What they, again, sold to big multinational corporations.
Yeah, that was another thing. The government came in and said, this is not your land anymore, we're going to take it. Apparently there's a little brouhaha down in Australia where their church is now apologizing to the indigenous Aborigines for having built churches on stolen land. Doesn't mean they're going to give the land back, but they put up a nice little plaque that said, we feel really bad.
But that's not enough. It's not just only enough about that. They should give the land back.
Well, the point I want to make here, when we look at the abuses of the Canadian residential school system or the misappropriation of lands by the church down in Australia, this is an organization and a group that doesn't walk their own talk. We're always being shown this list of 10 commandments, and I know the lists are different between the Protestants, the Jews, and the Catholics. They don't walk their own talk. They don't follow their own rules. And yet they hold themselves up as the supreme representative of a divine moral authority over all mankind. And very clearly from their actions, they are not.
But this is still going on. Now,
yes.
For example, here in New Brunswick, the native people, and right across Canada, they have now a movement, Idle No More. And one of their prime incentives is about stop, for example, the shale gas fracking, and how in hard-handed the Royal Canadian Mounted Police basically is manhandling peaceful protesters here.
We're having that down in the United States as well. I mean, the fracking is becoming a major, major problem with provable harm to the civil population, and the government and law enforcement are firmly on the side of these shale oil gas companies, and they're getting abusive. We saw abuse against the Occupy protesters. We're seeing abuse and harassment against Tea Party. Very clearly the idea that we have a First Amendment right to freely express our opinions about what's going on has all but vanished between the free speech zones and outright violence against those who disagree with government and corporate ideas. Now Monsanto is going on the offensive against anybody who's questioning GMOs. They're trying to imply that we're all potential terrorists because we don't believe as we're told to believe. And the situation is rapidly escalating. We're just getting closer to the point where the American people are going to throw their hands up in despair and say, I don't want to live in this country anymore, and I certainly don't want my children to live in this country anymore. I don't accept what's being done. I'm not willing to live the rest of my life like I'm living right now. And that's when it's all going to start really exploding. And again, I'd like to avoid that because I don't want to see a lot of innocent people gunned down in cold blood with all those hollow point bullets. I still think if we just wait patiently enough, it's all going to come crashing down. But I know a lot of people, patience is running out. Got to take a break for commercials. Be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our show today, how time flies when you're losing your temper, which I am after 20 years of watching all of this stuff going on. How very frustrated I am that everything I saw coming 20 years ago has come about. And in terms of my primary agenda of trying to discourage this government from solving this economic mess with a new nuclear world war, it looks like I've failed. And I'm not entirely cheerful as a result of that. We're going to go back to the phones here. Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I want to touch on, I'm sure you heard the story that when the Washington Post got sold, it was like less than 10% of what they could have sold it 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And you and I both know why. They lied about 9/11, and they lied about the WMDs and all the other lies. And that's why they, that's why they lost. And so that's a piece of good news right there. But,
well, it's not just the Washington. Before you go any further, I mean, that's not just the Washington Post. I mean, every media organization that stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States government while they lied to us about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, how the economy is doing well, and if you're hungry, it's your fault. They're losing audience. Back before I took my hiatus away from film and TV work, I was working on a commercial down at one of the network affiliates here in Honolulu. The place was just an empty barn. They've had to let staff go. They're surviving on interns they get to work for them for free from over at the local universities. They don't have the audience any longer. In fact, at this point, the overstating of their audience has become epidemic. The ad agencies are starting to complain about that. And it's just like these cloud server companies and internet service providers like Facebook who went along with the U.S. government's agenda, and now it's coming back to haunt them with loss of customer, loss of clients, loss of ad revenue. And they all got dragged down together. And no, I don't have any sympathy at all for the prostitutes in the corporate media who could have showed some kind of principle and actually reported on what the American people needed to know instead of what some corporate sponsor or the government wanted us to think. And so I don't have any sympathy for them at all.
Yeah.
Good
riddance.
riddance.
Shows that we're winning. But what I wanted to do is I had an idea, and on 9/11, to even people that you don't associate with, everybody at Genesis, everybody at Republic, everybody at the Rinse Network, the entire alternative network, get together and announce on 9/11 to text, make phone calls, leave your phone by a speaker playing your favorite 9/11 DVD, whatever it is, but just text and text and text. You could do it to your girlfriend or politicians, and just do so much texting, just overwhelm the NSA, make phone calls, just show that for them to complain, they would have to admit, I guess we do look at your content. But the NSA is just as guilty because they insider trading before 9/11. That was one of their jobs, to monitor the put options. But if we can get all the alternative people, Alex Jones, Jeff Rince, you, everybody. Oh, by the way, I still miss you not being on, Alex, from time to time. But anyways, I know. Power Hour, all that stuff. David Icke. If we could just get everybody just a text and text, 9/11 was an inside job. It doesn't matter who you send it to. And I think we might send a chill down their spine on 9/11. That's something you could do that would be easy.
It's a good idea, and I kind of think it's one I would support and go along with a couple of provisos. First of all, when you're sending this information to your friends and neighbors and family, do it gently and not harassing. Remember, the proper way to get somebody to cross a bridge over a stream is to stand on the other side and invite them over. You can't go over to their side of the bridge and whack them on the rear end and drive them across. They won't like that. Second, with regard to texting and flooding the corporate media and the government about 9/11, they already know it was a fraud. We're not going to give them any kind of an insight they don't already have. They'll just dig their heels in that much deeper. What we can do is just emphasize the fact that nobody in this country believes them anymore about any of this stuff. If there were a real crisis about to happen, and the government needed the American people to go along with whistling Dixie in the key of C to save the planet, they couldn't get it right now. This is a government that really cannot function any longer in terms of civil governance. They can just bully and threaten and scream at people to try and get their way, but history has shown that doesn't last very long. And the government...
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I think the Boston bombing may have been the final nail when that guy was at the press conference asking who is running the drills. Is this a false flag to give up our liberties? And those guys didn't have a very nice look on their face. I think that really makes them think now before they try something else.
You'd like to think so, but obviously from this conference call story, the motto of the top levels of the federal government continues to be, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. They're all morons and idiots. They'll just believe any lie we tell them. It's a form of self-deception and delusion, which is very, very dangerous because they're continuing to make more and more critical policy mistakes. Clint, got to let you go here because I want to finish up our show today with a comment. We always hear about America. There are songs, God Bless America, America the Beautiful. We are always taught about America, we should love America. But what is America? Do we have a clear idea what that is supposed to be? And I would argue that the time has come to stop allowing anybody else to tell you what America is. And the time has come for you, the Americans, to decide for yourself what America is supposed to be. What principles does it stand for? How is it supposed to treat the American people? And once you have settled in your own mind what America is supposed to be, the time is then at hand to ask, is this it? Is what we have here right now in the United States really what America is supposed to be? I think for most of you the answer is going to be an overwhelming no. We were all raised with an image of what America was supposed to be, enshrined in the Bill of Rights. And this idea that we stood for the high moral ground, for human rights. As we look around with the scales fallen from our eyes today at what our government is doing in our name, with our money, with our children, I think we're all united in unanimous agreement. This is not it. This is not what America was ever supposed to be. Where we're all being looted to serve the money junkies, to serve Israel, our children being sent off to foreign wars of conquest in exchange for control over the world's natural resources. The people who are in charge of this government do not represent the will of the American people at all. So that's your homework assignment, to seriously think. Write it down. What is America to you? And then start looking out your window and ask yourself if this that we see today is what you think America is supposed to be. So I think for most of you the answer is going to be no. We have gone off the tracks of what this nation was supposed to be. We've gone off the tracks of what made this nation the greatest nation on earth. And I keep reposting that wonderful clip from the newsroom where our lead protagonist gets up there and says, we used to be the greatest nation on earth. What happened? Who took it from us? Who took away our productivity, our ability to earn a higher standard of living? Where did it go? Who got that money? And why are our children dying in wars in other countries that have not done anything wrong to us? I hear the music. It's time for us to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back on the Republic Broadcasting Network tomorrow. Until then, stay safe, Stay angry. Stay skeptical. Stay informed. Make good choices. And aloha, America.